Good morning, dolls, and welcome to Little Gretchen's Workshop. So today we're going to do a couple quick cleaning utensils. Now, if you've seen a couple of my other videos, you know I like burlap, and I'm going to make a small hand broom. The technique is exactly the same as when I made the large full-size broom, except I make the dowel shorter. So I start with 4 small pieces of burlap and I use my fabric tack. And I put a little bit of fabric tack between each layer and I sandwich the dowel or stick. You could even use a piece of toothpick in between. You make sure you've got a good amount of the fabric tack or fabric fix in between so it will saturate the layers of burlap. And you want to really squeeze it in there really good. And if you don't have enough, sandwich a little bit between the ends and then squeeze it. Now you just want to kind of compress it until it, catches. And then you're going to allow that part to dry. But make sure it's really tight around that dowel. Now I'm going to allow that piece to dry. I already have one that I made up a little bit earlier that's dry. And I'm going to go ahead and use my pointed tool to pull some of those layers and threads of the burlap out, because that's what's going to give it the broomy effect. Yeah, I said broomy effect. And there you go. Now I trimmed it off and shaped it, and you can shape it whatever way you like. I like it to be in the shape of the large broom, just smaller. Okay, and just showing you what the original form was. So you just trim it down as small as you need it to get your look. Now around the neck or the handle of the broom, I add a little drop of the Gorilla Gel Super Glue before I begin to wrap my wire. Now I have some really old brass wire. I've probably had it since I was in high school, and I finally found a use for it. And I just begin to wrap it until I get it to the desired height and then trim it. And just make sure that last little piece of wire is really wound around the top because you don't want that to be stuck. Now I did trim the tip of the broom down a little bit. Now in another broom that I made, I did drill a hole and add a loop, but I didn't add it to this one. Now here I'm just painting on what would look like the stitching or the threads that would be across the straw fibers, just to give it more realism. In my earlier video with the large brooms, I actually stitched the broom, one of my brooms, but that was very tedious. I prefer to paint it on. Okay, and when you get that to your desired look, and when I looked at this a little bit, it just seemed like it was a little bit crooked. I really wasn't satisfied with it. And the really nice thing about this particular technique, if you don't like it, you can still trim it because it's just glue holding the layers of the burlap together. So I trimmed off the crooked part to give it a more even silhouette. And maybe you didn't notice it, but I did. That looks better to me. Okay. And see, this is the one that I made that had the little loop around the top. So I have one with the loop at the top and one without. It came out really good. So the one without the loop, I just added a little brown paint to make it look a little used or a little dirty. And there you are, just like that. 2 little hand brooms for your dollhouse. So here are the feathers for our little feather duster. So I added a little glue to the end of a dowel, the same size dowel I used for the hand brooms. And I cut some small bits of off of the quills from the feathers and just began to tap it. Just tap the glue tap the feathers right into the glue and gently begin to shape it into a cone shape. Just work with your feathers until you get the desired shape and desired fullness. Fill in any little missing gaps and you have a nice shape. Then you're going to trim the wooden dowel and actually trim off the excess feathers to give it a nice shape and make it look neat. Now I did have some little brass wire, and I wrapped it around the end of the dowel to cover the dowel and secure the ends of the quills to the handle. And when I finished that, I added a little super glue and trimmed it. Now at the tip, I added a little brass loop so I would be able to hang it on a hook inside my dollhouse kitchen. And just like that, I have a feather duster. Here to make the scrub brushes, I had some faux fur and some scrap pieces of basswood. So I took a piece of like a square dowel and I began to shape it because I wanted to make a brush with a handle on it. I sketched out where I wanted to carve out the handle and then just used my craft knife to scoop out the part that I didn't want. I did have to do quite a bit of sanding to get it smooth, but after carving it and sanding it, I had a nice shape. After the shape got in, I drilled a little hole at the top so that I'd be able to put a strand of burlap thread through the hole so I could hang it on a hook. And one of the pieces of fur kind of looked like yellow wool, and I used that on the tip of this particular brush. So there you have an old scrub brush with a handle. So now I want to make a scrub brush with some longer pieces or look like bristles. So I used some of the faux fur that had the longer strands, and I trimmed that off. And after trimming it off, I trimmed off some other ones too, another one that had sort of a gray shade. So I just put up quite a bit of the Gorilla Wood glue, and you want to pack a nice size clump of the fur into the glue. And you really want to pack the bottom of those strands of the fur into the glue because that's going to give you your most secure design. And you're going to have to allow it to dry, but just kind of shape it gently. And I did end up using my metal pointer tool to just kind of like smash the strands of the fur securely onto the base of the wood and into the glue. And you're going to have to allow it to dry before you actually trim it and do any kind of distressing of the handle. But just allow that to dry. Now I did have another shape brush I wanted to make. So I took another piece of the basswood and just kind of roughly shaped out the design that I wanted for this particular brush. And just kind of a rough design. It doesn't have to be perfect because I'm going to sand it. And after I sanded it, I cut out the shape. The shape doesn't have to be perfect because I did have to sand it. And because the wood was a little bit thin, I doubled it up. So I just added it on to another piece of wood with a shape sketched around it and allowed that to dry. Make sure it's evenly in the same shape. So I did want this particular brush to have a handle. So I cut out another small piece of basswood. And once those pieces were dry, I sanded them. And there's my handle. And just took a little glue and added that handle to the top of this particular brush because I wanted it to have like the design like the kind of brushes they use to scrub floors. Yeah, that's perfect. Now this was the one that we started on with the gray fur, and it's dry, so I'm just trimming it down. And I really like the way that looks. It's got the real look of a old scrub brush. And you can get so many different variations depending on the type of fur you have, the shapes of your wood. Now sometimes some of the fibers fall out, so you will have to fill them back in, but just use a little tweezer to tuck them in. Now for the scrub brush with the handle, I wanted a different type of fur, and in my little bundle, I found some with some different colors on it. And I used my little pointed tool to smush them into the glue because you definitely want it to be secure. And at the end of this particular piece, it was looking a little thin, and so I had to add a few more of the fur fibers to the end of it. So no worries on that. Just pushed it back with the metal tool and just grabbed another clump. And you're definitely going to have to allow that to dry. And it looks really wild and bushy, but that's good because it'll look like an old worn brush. But definitely allow it to dry before you begin to trim it. But I love how that fur has some variation in color because you do see old brushes that look like that. So now I'm trimming it off. And there's the gray one. And those really are turning out nice. And these type of items just add so much realism to any miniature scene. Look at that. I love it. I really, really love it. So they definitely need some distressing because that's looking a little bit too bright and too clean for me. So I'm adding a little acrylic paint. And you can distress these as much as you want. You can use black, you can use brown. In with any kind, you could even have painted them if you wanted it to be painted. That would be another way to add variation to something like this. Just take your time. And I added a little black, a little gray, a little brown. And you could even like scuff it up like with some sandpaper or your craft knife. But be very careful because items like these are kind of delicate. You don't want to break them. And I did make several different brushes. I didn't show them all in this video, but I just want to show you what's possible. Use your imagination and come up with your own variations. And if you're enjoying these videos, I would like you to let me know in the comments. Also, like, share, and subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you'll be alerted to other videos uploaded here on Little Gretchen's Workshop. Check out my Rooming House Dollhouse videos and also my how-to videos to see more ways you can make other little accessories for your dollhouse and miniature scenes. Looking forward to seeing you again here on Little Gretchen's Workshop. Bye-bye, dolls.